We're proud to welcome you to the Exceptional Advisor podcast series brought to you by the Investments and Wealth Institute. This series aims to help you to better serve your clients, differentiate yourself from the competition, and enhance your ability to communicate those differences. Hi, I'm your host, Bob Powell. Hi, and welcome to the Retirement Management Journal panel discussion. Hi, I'm Bob Powell, and my guests today are Lori Lucas, François Gadenne, and Jan Gundersen. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Great to have you here. So our goal with this discussion is to address what you all think are the most pressing issues when it comes to financial professionals helping their clients plan for and live in retirement. You sent us a long list of what you wanted to talk about, and we've narrowed it down to 5 topics. And with hope, we'll offer up some substantive, actionable advice as part of this discussion. So without further ado, let's jump into our first topic. Lori, you wanted to talk about caregiving and retirement. Why is that?
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, I was really passionate about this topic because I think there's a huge opportunity for advisors here to help their clients with caregiving. And it's such an important topic. As our former First Lady, Rosalind Carter, famously once said, there are really only 4 types of people: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. And we see some of the statistics around this. In 2023, according to the Retirement Confidence Survey, 1 in 5 people over age 25 were unpaid non-institutional caregivers. So this is a very large group of people. And what we find is that about 1 in 4 of them are actually providing financial support as well as physical caregiving support. Mm-hmm. So caregiving does take a toll on retirement, according to what we see, which is that, for one thing, caregivers are less confident about their retirement prospects. According to the Retirement Confidence Survey, 1 in 4 caregivers in the upper income group, so this is the upper income caregivers, are not confident about retirement versus 17% of non-caregivers. And 3 in 4 caregivers are concerned about the impact on retirement of providing care. And the other retirement impacts are things like more caregivers retire earlier than planned than non-caregivers, primarily due to caregiving or their own healthcare problems. Caregivers are more likely to have lower assets and problems with debt. Fewer than half of caregivers age 50 or older report that their care recipients have plans for future care, such as handling instructions or such as instructions for handling financial matters. And here's the opportunity. Many caregivers, 27%, don't believe that financial services companies know how to help them with retirement. So that's the opportunity for advisors to really step in and provide this important function. So, in answer to your question, that we talked about earlier, how deep should advisors go here? I think the opportunity is to go very deep because, helping caregivers navigate the impact of caregiving on their retirement outcomes, it can be as simple as incorporating caregiving costs into retirement projections. And this is especially important since we know that retirees routinely express remorse about spending too much on others and not being able to afford their own care. So it's a very emotional topic for retirees and others who are doing caregiving. And they can, because it's so emotional, it's a good opportunity for the advisor to kind of step in and through something as kind of objective as a retirement projection model, show their clients what the impact is so that they can make a more rational, balanced caregiving decision. Yeah. And so, and this also includes such things as just not only incorporating the cost of caregiving, but the impact of caregiving on retirement age as part of the retirement projections.
Yeah. So Lori, from my perch, it seems like advisors are somewhat ill prepared to help their clients with this notion of caregiving, housing options, healthcare documents that may need to be completed, like DNRs or living wills, that they don't have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to do that at the moment. Would you agree, or am I off base here?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it's also that there might be a hesitancy that advisors have because it is such a fraught topic. No one wants to talk about these things. because it's you're talking about end of life type of things. But again, because the advisor can come at the topic from a very professional and knowledgeable standpoint, if they choose to, they can help people overcome some negative emotions they might have that might be preventing them from taking positive actions.
Yeah. It seems to me that some education is needed. Jan or François want to weigh in?
I think the education is exactly the right topic. I think many advisors are used to working with centers of influence throughout their business. And it's that pivot to retirement and maybe expanding that Rolodex of who those centers of influence are, that's critical. Elder care, social workers, for example, probably not on most advisors' Rolodex, but when you are looking to help clients with caregiving decisions, it could be a valuable resource. I think the other piece, and Lori kind of mentioned it, there's one thing to identify and maybe even refer a client. The other piece is to then bring those decisions, that information back into the financial planning process to really model out what do those decisions mean to your retirement? How much might you have to spend providing care? And what does that do for your situation in the future? That needs to be brought back into the financial discussion. It's not just a refer, get an expert to help you, and I've done my job. It does have to be brought back into the discussion.
Yeah. Jan, when you say that expanding the centers of influence, I think elder law attorneys, geriatric care managers, people familiar with assisted living facilities or nursing homes or CC continuing care, retirement communities. There's a whole batch of people above and beyond CPAs and lawyers that someone may need to include in their Rolodex now.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah. François, you and I have known each other for a very long time. I know firsthand that you had to do caregiving for your parents along the way. I'm sure you have some thoughts about what Lori and Jan have had to say.
Sure. Actually, one of the center of influence that advisors can refer to is the IWI. I don't know if you remember, in 2017, Patrick Collins and I wrote a monograph, which was actually quite large, and 2 of the 3 sections were published in the Monitor, and the title was, "Are You a Curve, a Triangle, or a Rectangle?" And I think the key question as you read the article, especially the very short first 7-page part, is it hinges on a question which is, who is the ideal client for this recommendation? And you could extend this conversation or this question to who is the ideal advisor for this recommendation. What strikes me, having worked in retirement, having retired, and now having lived in retirement for quite a while along the way reading research, is that the industry is extremely fragmented, and one-size-fits-all recommendations really tricky. And so it's interesting if you're an advisor to look at your book of business, and this may or may not apply to your book. It's also very interesting to look at what is the nature of your business. If you are a curve and what you provide is mostly portfolio management, I think it's a stretch to go in this area. And indeed, you need to start to enroll different centers of influence. And the template that helps you the most to figure out what's what, where you can help, and who to bring is obviously the household balance sheet, because it becomes your summary for all of these topics. What struck me in retirement is you can really think of retirement as going through, it's sort of like a steeplechase. You go through a series of continuity, discontinuities, new continuity. And it's not like all or nothing. It's a daily degradation of various things. And then, yes, at some point, the degradation is so large that somebody needs to take care of you. And obviously that should be in your retirement plan. And, the policy statement and the various other things that we've put into the household balance sheet and the RMA are there for that. And so I think the IWI, given what it has with the RMA and all the work that we've done, is a very, very good place to address a lot of these issues.
Yeah. François, as you suggest that there's an ideal advisor for this, I also think about as you add these services to your practice, there's the possibility that your profit margins may decline. I'll make that a jump ball question. Any thoughts about whether advisors should pursue these services at the risk to their profits by chance?
So there's an 80-20 issue there, which is, what provides 80% of your profitability for 20% of work? And then do you really want to take something that's going to take 80% of your work, but only contribute 20% of your profitability? That is a valid business decision to make. And again, why, we go to this question of who is the ideal client for this recommendation, or who is the ideal advisor for this recommendation? My experience going through these issues is it's a good idea for my advisor to suggest that I look at those things, but I have found it more comfortable to go to lawyers to prepare all of these documents. And I think there's an interesting topic we could discuss here, which is how far should an advisor go and where should they stop? And we know there are areas where there's a hard regulatory stop, like with Medicare. It may be more fuzzy with others, and maybe the rate limiting factor becomes this 80-20 that we just discussed. But I have found it as a person to like the team approach rather than the, advice from a single person or team. I'd love to hear what other people have to think about that.
Yeah, I would agree that it would be interesting to have a specialization in caregiving, and there's a lot of documents out there that people use to interview potential advisors, and emphasizing that if that's a need of yours, that there could be specialists out there that either François, like you said in your case, have personal experience with caregiving or have taken it upon themselves to become knowledgeable in that area. Because unfortunately, we see with many caregivers is they don't go to professionals, they don't go to lawyers even. They just go to family and friends, and they don't know what resources are out there, and they're kind of winging it, which is not obviously ideal. So even to the extent financial advisor can give insight into all the resources out there, that would be extremely helpful.
We have a lot of topics to go through. Laura, you wanted to also talk about a related topic, which is disability and retirement. Eager to hear more.
So it's it's a very similar topic as with caregiving, in the sense that you have the 1-2 punch of people saving at lower levels when they have a disability, and also that they tend to retire earlier. It's even more pronounced when it comes to caregiving. It's even more pronounced when it comes to disability. 1 in 4 people aged 65 to 74 have a disability, such as hearing, vision, cognitive, or more commonly, an ambulatory disability. And 45% of those aged 70 or older have disabilities. They also suffer even more than caregivers and others when it comes to having debt, particularly credit card debt. So this is affects not only their financial position in retirement, but as we've seen, also their mental condition in retirement. They tend to have lower retirement satisfaction, lower levels of retirement well-being, and even a reduced standard of living that's more common than people that are not disabled. So the bottom line is that unfortunately, as we saw with caregivers, financial advisors are less likely to be relied upon by the disabled. 22% say that they have a financial advisor that they rely on, compared to their non-disabled counterparts, which is 32%. And like we saw with caregivers, they're more likely to rely on friends and family, which is not ideal. So tailoring financial advice offers another opportunity to financial advisors. They can offer, similar to with the caregivers, they can offer specialized planning, such as incorporating the specific needs and costs into retirement projections. And what we see with disabled is that they are more likely to be spending money on housing and out-of-pocket medical costs, as you can imagine, versus and less on entertainment in retirement. So incorporating those into the retirement projections can be very important. And there's plenty of data out there in surveys such as the Health and Retirement Study that can help provide that modeling for financial advisors. Again, disabled retirees need help navigating resources, including community and government programs, to the extent that financial advisors can help them with that. And as a standard part of their practice, advisors really should be, I think this is extremely important, to have free retirement discussions about the importance of short and long-term disability insurance, as well as types of long-term care insurance alternatives that are out there. So I think those are the opportunities for advisors.
Yeah. Jan, would you concur?
Absolutely. I think, this topic and the caregiving, as Lori pointed out, are very intimately tied. And for me, it brings back something François said, which is, this is a business model decision for advisors, right? As they think about their value prop and where they want to focus their business, having that business model that allows you to bring in the right experts when you have a unique situation like this, whether it's someone caring for disabled or someone who is disabled and is trying to plan for their own retirement. It is about setting up your practice to be able to handle these type of things. You don't have to be the expert in every situation. And I go back to that Rolodex statement. As you think about Social Security, disability insurance, you don't have to be the expert. And most advisors aren't the expert in Social Security withdrawing, period, never mind the disability insurance, ABLE accounts. But having those resources that when you do have that situation, your business model allows you to go pull in an expert and provide your client that advice. It's back to François' 80-20. You don't have to put 80% of your effort. You have to set your business model up the right way to be able to go tap the resources you need when you have these type of clients.
Yeah. I'm curious, given your role, whether you think the asset management industry has done enough to help advisors with these discussions, or is there more that could be done?
I think there's always more education that can be done. And I know there's a lot being thrown at advisors. There's a tremendous amount of product development and enhancements. Again, I go back to, if an advisor has chosen or chooses to make this core to their advisor alpha, I think the industry needs to provide them the education, the resources, the connections to really build a successful business.
François?
No, it's all good. For me, what always makes me nervous about when I hear the word education is my experience with a lot of it is that it's normative. In other words, here's the one and true way. Now shut up. My experience in retirement, again, is that the most valuable type of education is the one that makes you ask good questions. It's hard to ask good questions. There's a lot of dumb questions out there. And I think what we could do here collectively is really help us, each one of us, and help advisors or whoever listens to this, by way of education, is in learning how to ask good questions. I'll give you an example. Bob, you'll probably remember that when I was in my 50s, which is a long time ago. What I remember reading as we did research and we're asking questions about disability is we realized actually that disability was something that was particularly relevant at the time for people in their 50s, and much more so than death. And so that disability insurance in that decade proved to be, again, looking at data, more valuable than life insurance. And I remember buying disability insurance for the period, and I found it to be insurance. I never had to use it and just paid the premium. And it was also pretty expensive. But what it did is it protected human capital. If you go back to the household balance sheet, it was a very powerful way to protect a meaningful risk in my household balance sheet, which was the potential to earn money from human capital. Here, I think we're talking about disability of two other kinds. One is people that may have chronic disabilities that might be more like impairment in functions. And then also further impairment in functions that start to develop, in your 70s. And we know that usually that's the decade where chronic problems starts to pop up. And I don't know what insurance there is for this. And what it is that we can do for clients. And so I would try to collect all this and say, what would be the good questions that one could ask either as a client or as an advisor? Again, as Jan points out, given the book of business. And what can you do? And what is it that you shouldn't do? There's a good instinct to help people with everything, but obviously we can't. And so where can we help and where should we not try? So that was my example of disability, how, disability in the 50s seemed to be very important for a specific purpose in the household balance sheet. So if we now look at disability in retirement, what does it affect in the household balance sheet? Obviously not human capital anymore because they're retired. So what can we do? What would be a good question about disability? And the way to measure this would be what part of the household balance sheet might we help with in that context? Maybe reducing expenses, maybe finding ways to increase income. I don't know. That's what's mulling over.
Yeah. Just one reaction, Jan, you mentioned Social Security disability insurance. I've been hard pressed to find advisors who can talk confidently about that subject. And obviously there are lots of attorneys that focus on that, but goodness knows that's one of those areas where sometimes advisors just throw their hands up because they have no knowledge of it. So, Laurie, any closing thoughts on that topic before we move on?
Yeah, just, again, some of the sources of data looking at things like the health and retirement study, to François' point, one of the biggest fears retirees have is about assisted care and the need for it down the line. And this is a conversation I think that can be productive in a couple of different ways with retirees. One is to give them, some good statistics on the likelihood that they will need assisted care, what that means to them. I mean, I think there's a lot of fear involved in that. And retirees are prone to want to hoard their nest egg out of concern that they are going to have this big liability at the end of life, which many will not. Some will. It's actually not as many as I think people believe it is. I think there's an disproportionate fear of that relative to what the data says. So that might be helpful for retirees thinking about the threat of long-term disability and what it means to their balance sheet, as François indicates.
Yeah. So, Jan, I want to turn my attention to a topic that you suggested. I'm really eager to have you expand on it. You wanted to talk about how the industry seems to have focused on the needs the investor may not know that they have. I've added a second question which is whether the industry is building solutions that benefit the industry and perhaps less so the client. So maybe you can tackle the first one first and we'll get to the second one.
Sure. For me, this is an interesting topic because I've had a background in product and product development, and there seems to be a disconnect between the client need and the product development. And I don't know that it's anything that's being built is bad or wrong, but it's just that understanding from an advisor perspective and a client perspective what these products are built to do. And as I kick it around, part of it for me is through the accumulation phase, which again is where most advisors and clients have experience. The industry has built products that compensates a client for taking risk. In retirement, we try to immunize risk and charge them to immunize risk. And it is a dramatic pivot that I think just makes that product development for retirement just foreign to an advisor and to a client. And so at times we're building products that require hyper-personalization from an advisor, right? And François used the word normative. I think we're actually, that's a tension again in that product development, because there is a little more scale in accumulation, products that do fit a broad swath of clients' risk tolerance. In retirement, with the riders and options within products like annuities, there is an opportunity to hyper-personalize what that product immunizes and how it immunizes. It takes a level of competency, familiarity with the product, and familiarity with your client's preferences and capacity for preferences that is just dramatically different. So I look at maybe the root cause, what causes the challenge, and then to your question of, is the industry building solutions to problems the client doesn't know they have? I think it is that shift. It's that shift from an accumulation mindset, understanding that I'm balancing the risk I'm willing to take with what I'm getting rewarded, to what are the risks I want to immunize in retirement and how much am I willing to pay? I think the industry has built that choice into products, and the client's mindset has just not shifted to how to think about a retirement income product, how to value it, and candidly, how an advisor advises the client on what are we willing to pay for that immunization instead of what are we getting paid for the risk we're taking.
Yeah. So two reactions. One is I think about target date funds as you're chatting about solutions. And I think about how Professor Emeritus Zvibodi might say, well, target date funds don't necessarily help people save for retirement because it's just based on time horizon. That's one. Secondly, in retirement, we know there are multiple risks, and it's hard to immunize all the risks with one solution. Thoughts, reaction?
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And I think, I refer to it as levers. When you talk about this preference and capacity for preference of the client, you're talking about pulling levers, right? The liquidity that they want in their retirement savings versus the guarantees that they want, current spending versus longevity, their own retirement quality and leaving a legacy. These are all levers, and there are trade-offs. And how an advisor helps a client understand those trade-offs and then how they apply products to those trade-offs, it's complex. And so, yeah, I agree completely that, a target date doesn't take into consideration those trade-offs, and really no one product can balance all those trade-offs. And it does become almost product allocation. We talk about asset allocation when you're building a portfolio. It becomes an exercise of product allocation to address those levers and an individual client's preference. Retirement is personal. It is going to require more work for an advisor to address those personal preferences during retirement.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was Moshe Milevsky that coined that phrase, product allocation, some years ago.
Yes.
François, I'm sure you're chomping at the bit to respond. So let me get you in before I get to Lori.
Jan, that's very good. This feels just like the old RIA discussion.
Yes.
Yes. If you remember with the household balance sheet, the big idea was that you looked at risk capacity. And then from that, we were able to look at what we call the risk management techniques allocation, which Moshe shortened as product allocations. And yes, that's extremely individual. Again, going back perhaps to a personal example, when it came to my own retirement, what I determined at the time to be the major risk that I wanted to hedge was inflation. And so the product choice, the product allocation that I made, or the risk management technique allocation that I made there for the hedging bucket was tips. And I built a ladder of tips. That proved to be a rather good decision in the last few years. I'll make a more general point because that's something that I've been researching and working on for the past 7 years, which was how do we go beyond what we had done back then. But the point that Jan made that is key there is that in the investment management world, we work with averages. And namely the arithmetic average of returns, and we call that expected returns. Now, that equation is a bunch of returns divided by their number of returns, and nothing in that equation includes variance. And so expected return, arithmetic average, the average, or the expectation is a measure that does not include variance. And once we start to move from the general to the individual, obviously what matters is the individual variance, the difference between the individuals. So Jan started right. The way we do it on the investment side, on the accumulation phase, we do it with metrics that are based on averages, and there's scale for that, and it works. The minute we flipped to retirement, it became very individualized because all of a sudden, individual variance rears its ugly head. And this is really where I think the product development and things that matter starts to roll in, which is how do you bake variance back in there? So people say, oh, mean variance optimization. Sort of, but not really. And so what else is there? Well, there's a lot there, and maybe that's another discussion. But I agree that the big shift is from working with averages to all of a sudden working with individual variance, what I think Jan called immunization of specific risks. And I think every single one of us will have to face that decision of what are the top one or two risks that we want to immunize, because you can't immunize them all. First, there may be no products for it, and second, you probably don't have the budget for it. And so, what is the one or two that you think if you get that, the rest will take care of itself?
So, as you're talking, François, and Jan, I'm thinking that maybe what comes next is not necessarily product innovation, but maybe service innovation, right? And as I think about building retirement income plans, I think it's not a off-the-shelf solution. It's really a spreadsheet with rows and columns, and it's hyper-personalized. And maybe that's where the innovation is that doesn't exist today. Look, Laurie, any thoughts about that? Any reaction?
Yeah, no, I really like the way that Jan and François have framed this about the trade-offs, because I actually agree there are trade-offs, and one of them is healthcare costs, which I think is a huge consideration for many retirees, and I also agree on inflation. This is, when you talk to retirees, they're much more concerned about things like inflation than they are things that are driving guaranteed income solutions. And so it leads me to wonder, if the industry, to your question about what solutions are we pursuing that maybe we're being too aggressive about at the expense of other solutions, and guaranteed income to me falls into that category. And in particular, I'm concerned about the idea of defaulting people into a guaranteed income solution. That's been something that's been thrown out there as a possible antidote to the annuity puzzle, which of course is the economic theory that the annuities make people better off when they face the risk of outliving their assets. But even so, few retirees opt to receive their retirement benefit in the form of an annuity. So why is that? And the conclusion has been things like lack of understanding. People just don't get annuities. For framing, it's easier to take a lump sum than to annuitize. Let's make it easier for people. Or it could be something as simple as aversion. People just don't like annuities. And I'll never forget a focus group I saw many years ago, where retirees were asked about their reaction to having an annuity and putting their money into an annuity. And a woman took a pad of paper and she said, "It's like this pad of paper. I don't want an insurance company to have my pad of paper and give me a piece of paper every once in a while. I want my pad of paper, and I want to be in control of my pad of paper." And if that's how people react, that's a legitimate behavioral consideration that needs to be taken into account. So are we as an industry pursuing annuity solutions that 20 years from now will be in the same exact position we are today, which is only 1 in 7 retirees have used a product that guarantees monthly income. And maybe our efforts are better spent on other parts of the concern or other concerns that retirees have and are very focused on, such as inflation and healthcare costs.
As you're talking, Lori, I'm thinking that for me, the two big risks in retirement, and there are many according to the Society of Actuaries, and also as we outlined in the Retirement Management Advisor course, which are inflation and longevity, and the tools that you would use to manage and mitigate those risks are different. Maybe annuities for longevity, and risky assets for inflation, perhaps. I also think too that we're living in a world where not all advisors are able to offer annuities because they're not licensed. They may need to have a center of influence that could help there. But also in doing that, they may lose revenue and then hurt their business model because of sort of offloading a product solution that they can't account for. Is that fair to say?
And I think the question also is it guaranteed income or is it income stability? If you can provide a stable income through, a systematic withdrawal strategies, or even a social security bridge strategy, or some other means that doesn't guarantee the income, but at least provides a source of stability, that might do a lot to address that consideration without having to go as far as providing a guarantee.
Yeah. Jan, I want to turn my attention to another topic that you brought up, which is how the U.S. retirement system stacks up against the rest of the world and what lessons we can learn perhaps from places like the Scandinavian countries or England or Australia or perhaps others that you may think are better off than us.
Yeah, I those two who know me, I'm an analogy person, right? So I draw comparisons, and I think it's a little bit of how I learn and how I research things. And so this question for me was a bit of what can we learn, right? When we compare our state of readiness, our system, what can we learn from others and the decisions others are making? Because around the world, governments, organizations are actively making decisions right now about their own pension systems, saving systems, retirement readiness of their citizens. And I saw a description of the U.S. System, if you will, and it was voluntary, complex, do-it-yourself, and heavily financialized, if that is even a word, but basically complex, right? A lot of different products, as we just talked about. And that choice and really that management is put on the individual. And if you were going to summarize the U.S. system versus a number of these other systems, it is where does the responsibility lie to be ready for retirement? And in the U.S., it is on the individual for the most part. And other countries that do have better retirement readiness, the government has felt some responsibility and has put programs together to provide some of that readiness. And as I look at other countries that we can learn from, that's the crux of it. Is really how much responsibility the individual has, how much responsibility the government has, and how they've tried to balance the two. The easy example there is Australia, with their superannuation and really that forced savings, and what that's done for their retirement readiness. On the other end of that, the UK, and they've recently changed some of their rules, but on the other end, at that distribution end, they had forced annuitization. Right. And so it was, hey, don't go spend this all at once. Don't go on a nice cruise around the world, but actually take this money in more of an annuitized form. I would argue Australia learned from the UK. They didn't have that annuitization option at the end of their superannuation. They're starting to introduce that to really drive some of that. OK, you are now sitting on a better net readiness. Now let's give you the options and choice to distribute that income, as Lori used, in a more stable way through time. And then I think the other are just the social programs. Our social programs aren't as strong as others. Now, that there's a trade-off. We'll use that word here through the podcast. Those social programs come with higher taxes. And so there is that maybe U.S.-centric wanting their value now versus paying for something now and getting the value later, which is taxes. But Australia, again, has a robust social platform. even their core, what we'll call pension or floor, has a stronger floor than we do. And I would argue, if you look at Denmark and some of the Scandinavian countries, same thing. But it comes at higher taxes. And I think that's the trade-off decision the U.S. has to make. First and foremost, it is more available. These retirement programs are more available and mandated in other countries. I think we could do that at low cost. The mandate is something the government has to make a decision if we have the stomach for. And then the social programs, and probably in that order, because I think they get more political and more maybe unpalatable as you move up towards taxing people more now for the social programs later. But I do think availability can come at a relatively low cost. And then really thinking about the mandates and starting to really decide, is that something the government needs to lean in and take a position on? And will people fight it at the outset? Probably. Will they see the benefit later on? I think so. And I think you can point to other countries and show those citizens' experience, perhaps to assuage some of the concerns in making more draconian decisions for the U.S. retirement. But the Melbourne-Mercer Pension Index, just as an example, again, comparing, has the U.S. as a C+. I think all of us could just look at that, and there's a number of different ways to grade readiness. But if you look at that, clearly if you have a C+ and other countries have an A, there's something to be learned. And I think we need to start taking some of those analogies, some of those comparisons pretty serious. So that's just it. To me, that's another topic. How an advisor helps personalize it is critical. If we're not helping clients get to that point where they're engaging with a client for that hyper-personalization for their preferences, François said it, a lot of what you might want to immunize, you might not actually have the funds to immunize. We've got to change that problem.
Yeah. One quick follow-up. When I think about the UK and I think about their NEST program that they've mandated employers to offer the retirement plans to their employees, we've made some headway there. We only have maybe, according to, I think maybe Laura, you would agree, EBRI has it at 50% coverage right now. We've put in place some credits for small businesses to offer retirement plans, but we're still a long way from where the UK is with respect to mandating savings for employees. Right.
Absolutely.
Would you go that far in the U.S.?
I think I would tackle those problems maybe in that order that I mentioned. I think availability, and then mandate, and then social workers. Maybe that's just my personal preferences. I'm not ready to pay higher taxes. I guess I could be convinced of it. But I do think a mandate is something that's worth considering. I really do.
All right. François, you're the Frenchman in the group here. You must have a reaction to that.
Yeah. As you know, I was born and raised in France and came over here when I was 22. And for those of you who've read the template for reading research papers, you can see in the introduction that what motivated me to work on retirement is seeing the difficult retirement of two prior generations. One in France, and then as I moved my parents here in this country. There's a word of caution that I would bring in from an evolutionary perspective. And I think we should all remember the dinosaurs. And they're no longer here. Anything that we have, my thoughts, your thoughts, is a model. None of us has a grasp of truth. What we have is a model of what we think is around us. And we're all very different. I come with my history, you come with your history, everybody comes with their own history. And we all have models in our head. Some may be better than others, but this is my problem with normative or anything of that nature. The minute you start to impose your model on other people, there's going to be error. And sometimes this error is so big that it's an extension event. And so I am extremely nervous around anything that has to do with, imposing anything on other people, starting with my own opinion. Because I know it's only a model, and it's subject to what Karl Popper called falsification. All it takes is one example, and one black swan, and clearly not all swans are white. And so I look at this and I'm saying, yeah, I understand all the arguments from optimization, but when you optimize something, you make it brittle. And something that's brittle, eventually when there's a shock that's large enough, it shatters. So again, we're back to trade-off. How much do you optimize and how much do you build for resilience so that there's another generation that gets to live as opposed to being totally destroyed? And I fear anything that would cause us to go over the cliff like a bunch of lemmings, because all of a sudden it got imposed upon us. And that's what I like about the U.S. system compared to the French system. I came here because I could make choices that I could not make in France. And I think that's worth preserving. And though it may not be the most optimal solution, and it may not be the highest mark on some benchmark that somebody created, but that's a matter of what do you prefer. Again, models. My view is not better than yours. But one of us might survive and the other might not. And one could argue, okay, maybe that's symmetric, but even that is debatable.
In search of a more perfect retirement system. Laurie, given your career in corporate America, given your tenure at the Employee Benefit Research Institute, how does the U.S. stack up, and what do you think, what lessons can we learn from other countries?
Well, I think we stack up pretty well. And I agree with, I think I'm more in François' camp that, especially today, if you asked me that 20 years ago, I would have had a very different answer. But we've had a lot of things going on in the past 20 plus years, everything from the Pension Protection Act to the Secure 1 and Secure 2 that have made some significant changes in the retirement system. And even when you look at statistics like from organizations like eBree, they're incorporating people that have been in the retirement system prior to the advancements that we've seen recently. So you look at baby boomers, and they didn't benefit from things like the Pension Protection Act and Secure 1 and 2. Future generations will, and so I'm pretty optimistic about where we stand with our U.S. retirement system today. I think it's more about tweaks, pretty important tweaks, but as opposed to revamping it with things like mandates. And so 2 examples I have of, pretty meaningful tweaks. And I think that, we defaults have been around such as automatic enrollment, for decades now. And one thing that I really like about the Australian model is that it allows defaults in principle. I don't know if they really do this, but in principle, it allows defaults to be determined on an individual basis, taking into account wealth and salary and age and other information. And I think it's about time that the U.S. retirement system made that easy to do here as well. We've got a pretty simplistic default system based on, age, but there's a lot more that should be going into it. So I think that's something that could be incorporated. And then I think the other thing that I like about the Australian system is that they've implemented the stapled super fund, which is linked or stapled to an individual employee so that it follows the employee if they change jobs. I think one of the biggest problems the U.S. retirement system has, apart from low contribution levels, which we addressed to at least some extent with automatic contribution escalation, but we have done almost nothing around leakage. And so having the ability to have people's money follow them around the defined contribution system so that it doesn't get cashed out, I think that is something that a lot more thought and effort could be thrown at to great advantage. But again, in my opinion, these are more tweaks than we've got a fundamentally flawed system. I just don't believe that. I think we've got a pretty good system. And it's much better than when I started out in the industry.
So we have about 6 minutes left, and I'm going to apologize in advance. I'll give you each 2 minutes to maybe either talk about something that we might have missed that you want to mention, or just something that might bear reemphasizing. François, I'll give you first grab at this one.
One word: variance.
You got a minute 55 left.
We can embellish over the word, but that's the one thing, is individual variance. And in terms of embellishment, I would offer something for people to follow up with, is the work of the London Mathematical Laboratory with a researcher called Ole Peters, who's the lead of it. And the field is called ergodicity economics. And the point is very simple, is that the average, or expectation or expected returns, among the many findings, but that's a big one, represents an ensemble outcome. It's the typical outcome of a casino. It's the typical outcome of the ensemble. Whereas if you calculate something else called the time average growth rate, now you start to have a metric that represents the typical outcome of the individuals. And in the presence of variance, the ensemble average can be positive and the time average can be negative. And so this is my caution about forcing anything on anybody, is at the very core of the metrics that we use, we have a huge worm in the apple. Is we can see something that's positive where the experience of people around us is negative. And if that doesn't remind you of economic statistics, what will?
Well, I think anyone who listens to this or reads the transcript will have to grant them a PhD from the IWI just for those closing remarks. Jan, you're up next.
Yeah, I think for me, it's maybe a spin on variance. It's about the trade-offs, right? And I think as a result of that, it just reinforces to me the importance of advice. And it's the advisor's advice. It's the advisor surrounding themselves with the right centers of influence to provide the client with the right advice. It's going to be personal. Their situation, their preferences, the trade-offs they're willing to take are going to be personal. I think it's doable. I do think, you're going to be able to help clients determine what is most important to them. But it's about identifying those trade-offs, identifying their preference for those trade-offs, and then providing them the right advice, and you as an advisor having access to the right advice to help you do that.
Laurie?
Well, I want to thank François for the use of variance. I haven't heard that term thrown around so much since I worked for Roger Ibbotson, so it's been very refreshing. So I would say, because this podcast is really geared for financial advisors. I mean, they're working with people that do have resources. They're not working with people that have no resources. So a lot of the discussion, I know financial advisors can't be all things to all people, but I would hope that a lot of the discussion goes towards helping people figure out how to enjoy the resources they've spent their entire life amassing, and the quality of the retirement. And I just get very saddened when I hear stories of people that are unwilling to spend their nest egg because they're so afraid of running out of money. They're afraid of end of life, assisted living needs, whatever it is. And they're really not focused on the quality of their life in retirement. And so I think that does need to be part of the conversation, even if it is the financial advisor just giving them ideas of different resources that they can use to better prepare themselves to have a high quality life in retirement, and have a discussion, at least in some form that's beyond just the monetary aspects of retirement.
All right. Well, that brings us to the top of the hour. I want to thank you all for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us. I'm especially grateful that you took the time to spend with us and interact with each other and share all this with our readers and our listeners. So thank you. Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Advisor podcast brought to you by the Investments and Wealth Institute. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe through iTunes, Spotify, or our website at www.investmentsandwealth.org/podcast to get the latest episodes of our Exceptional Advisor podcast series. For additional resources, updates on events, and exclusive membership deals, visit www.investmentsandwealth.org.